Welcome, everyone. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Ashland, Massachusetts. Now we were just talking about how to say Ashland or Ashland. So I'm flummoxed. Thank you so much for starting me off that way, Andi and Julia. So today we're here with Julia Kent and Andi Arndt. Julia, as you know, is an amazing author of romance, rom-coms, and Andi is one of her narrators. So we're going to be talking all about how they do what they do in just a minute. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our adult programming, actually all of our programming. They're pretty awesome. And you for being here tonight. So I'm going to do just a quick introduction for Julia and Andi, because I think that you'll want to hear from them more than me. Julia, of course, is a best-selling author of rom-coms, as I said. She writes Billionaires and BBWs to new adult rock stars, and she finds sensual, goofy joy in every contemporary romance she writes. She did not meet her husband after dropping her phone in a men's room toilet, like Shannon from Shopping for a Billionaire. I would like to know how she met him, but we can have that discussion at another time. And Andi, I just learned this recently, is a multi-Audi award winner who actually created her own organization called narrator.life, an online hub for courses, coaching, and community for audiobook narrators. So like, not only is she an amazing narrator, she's created a home for other narrators to come along after her and with her. So I find that amazing. So I really appreciate that because I love audiobooks. So welcome, Julia and Andi. And I would just like to know how you know each other, because when we talked about doing this program, Julia and I, in September, people in my romance book club were like, Andi Arndt's one of your, oh my goodness. And that was it. Like, an idea was born. So how long have you known each other? How have you met? How did you decide that Andi was going to be your narrator, Julia?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's always great to see you again, and it's awesome to see all the people starting to come in. Actually, Andi and I met because another narrator recommended her to me. This was, I write romantic comedy as Julia Kent, but I also write romantic suspense as Melly Rain. And I was having one of those series done in audiobook, and I had approached a male narrator and he had suggested Andi, and I went, and thankfully Andi had room in her schedule, and off we went. And that was the Harmless series as Melly Rain. And so then when it was time, when it was time to do some other books in that series, her production company, I had heard great things about, and now I had worked with her. I contracted with her to do some other books in that series where other narrators within her group of narrators did those. And then I had been looking for the right voice for a particular character in my random series. And for years, people had been asking. I had been doing audiobooks in other series of mine, the Shopping for a Billionaire series and others. And so many readers asked, well, when are you going to do Darla? When are you going to do Darla? And I said, it's a certain kind of voice. I haven't found the right voice. And I had been working with Andi long enough and realized, wait a minute, the right person may have been under, right here the whole time. And so I approached Andi and explained, this is a different kind of voice. And she said, I'm here, I can do it. And so then I had Sebastian York and Tad Branson on board to do the other voices in the series. And then that's how I met. I originally met Andi because another narrator said, she's amazing. I think she would be phenomenal as the female for this.
And Andi, were you narrating for other authors when you met Julia? Had you been doing this for a while?
Yeah, I started narrating in about 2010. And so, I'm getting into my 13th year now, which is crazy to me. And I guess it was Kylie Scott's Stage Dive series that kind of put me on the map with romance. And now I'm about to do my 19th book with her. Wow. End of story releases on Valentine's Day. So, it's really gratifying over time, like with authors like Julia and with Kylie and others to see their work evolve and see them exploring new, new stories and new characters, and to kind of be there for all of it. It's cool.
Mm-hmm. So let's just dive right into the process. What is the process? Like, Julia, I think I mentioned on Facebook, I'm going to ask you, like, do you hear Andi's voice in your head when you're writing the books that you know she's going to narrate?
No, and no offense to any narrator, I don't hear the narrator's voices when I write. I hear my voice. And I think that personally, as an author, I have a voice as an author, and then I have a voice as a reader that lives in my head. And so I don't know if I'm different from other people in that sense, but when I listen to any audiobook, mine or someone else's, it's never the same voice that I heard in my head. Sometimes it's better, way better, in fact. But no, I haven't had that happen. But it's more when I finish. Well, in this case, the books had been written for years, and so like I said, I had gone on this search and had kind of given up, frankly, for the right person for Darla. But in other cases, I think there's only one book I've ever written where about halfway through it, I realized there was the perfect narrator for it. And I don't know if I should say that or not. But it was, I have a series called the Shopping for a Highlander series, and I have a Scottish football player. And I was halfway through it and thought, is Shane East available? And he's really hard to get. And I thought, but I was starting to imagine him narrating it. And for anyone who doesn't, well, if you're watching this, you know who Shane East is likely, but he's this just phenomenal British, well, he has great range, but he nailed it. And so it ended up being so far it's the first time where about halfway through a book, I was like, oh, I know who I want for this. But otherwise it's more that it's a combination of who has the right who has the voice that I imagine would be a good fit for a character. Sometimes it's who's available, because narrators get very booked very quickly. Many of them do. And other times it's kind of left to chance.
And so what do you do, Andi, when you get that manuscript from Julia? Is that the first time you've heard from her about a book that she has coming up, except for the contract part?
Well, I mean, usually the process is I'm asked if I have time and an interest in a project. And then I check my calendar, and if it's Julia, I'm interested, so that part's taken care of. Usually the Googling is more if the author's not familiar to me, or, I need to make sure it's a good fit, that kind of thing. So yeah, if I say yes and it's on the schedule, then there's a PDF delivery date, and that's also on my schedule. So when that PDF lands in my inbox, then the prep process begins. And then the recording process usually takes about a week, and then corrections come back, and I record corrections and send those off. They get dropped in. The whole thing gets mastered and delivered to Julia.
Really? A week? Like 24 hours a day? I mean, like how does, it seems like it would take so much longer.
Well, I mean, what's your usual word count, Julia?
It's all over the place. I would say my average would be 70. It depends on the book. Like for some, you've done 9 of my Melly Rain books, and those are shorter. But 70.
So that would be about a 7.5 hour book. And that would take me 3 to 4 days, because I can usually finish. I love when my schedule is spaced out, where I can just do like an hour and a half finished a day and do other stuff. But I've done as much as 4 hours and 45 minutes in a day, and I'll never do that again. I can work.
Is that like the author equivalent of writing 10,000 words a day? Is that
Yeah.
like the next day your brain, like in your case, your voice doesn't work?
Well, it's not my voice, it's my brain and my back and my butt, you know, because you have to sit and you have to sit quietly. And yeah, you know, I come out of, well, you know, you come out of the office like a zombie.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you pay for it the next day. So it's not like you can do that every day. The next day you're like lucky if you get a half an hour and you're going, why did I do that? So I really try to slow and steady.
But that's after, is it about the same amount of time for Julia, who you've been narrating a series, or is it longer for somebody you've never narrated for?
Oh, well, you know, it's actually just people's writing style. Sometimes I get into a flow with somebody's writing style where I could, when it's time to turn the page or scroll up to the next page, I could almost complete the sentence. Like I'm on their brainwave. And then there are some people who write either nonfiction, really long sentences, then you have to plan your breaths so that you don't breathe in weird places that take away from the meaning of the sentence. Or there are certain writers whose thought process and my thought process just are not congruent. So it just takes me a little bit longer to get comfortable in their writing and get into a flow. Yeah.
And Julia, you had said before we came on air that you really give like a lot of instructions when you send out a manuscript to be narrated. Is that like, what kind of things are important for you for narrator to know when they get your book?
Yeah, as I was saying earlier before this all started, it's been an evolution for me. I think the very first audiobook I sent, I just sent the PDF to the narrator. And I was looking at my notes. The very first narrator I worked with was Noah Michael Levine. And that was 2013. And I knew nothing. I just sent a PDF, and then that was back and forth, back and forth. He had lots of questions about pronunciations or mood, or, you know, what kind of person is this character? And he did a great job. But I started to learn to make sure to include pronunciation of names or strange regionalisms. For instance, if you live in Boston, you know that what almost every other part of the country says Peabody is actually Peabody. And you have to know that if you're writing about Boston. So but I also started to add things like general character personality. So for instance, in my Shopping for a Billionaire series, Tanya Eby was the second narrator I ever worked with, and she was referred to me by Gretchen Galway, whose book she had done, and it was it's been wonderful. I've worked with her now for years. But I have a character in there whose last name is Jacoby, and I grew up in a town with Jacoby Road, so everyone knows to pronounce it Jacoby, but some people might pronounce it Jacoby. And I realized, oh, I need to start giving pronunciation guides. But also, I had a character who was very uptight, like a very blustery, powerful, older, close to retirement age man who had built his fortune from the ground up. And he was always that person who just sucked all the oxygen out of the room whenever he walked into a room. And I really wanted to make sure that that showed in his voice. He wasn't just a jerk, or he wasn't just powerful and strong. He was that kind of person who, you know, kind of got under your skin, but you also had to have a little sympathy for him because he was like the big lion who was losing his power. So I try to also be careful. I don't want to give too much detail because it's like working with a book cover designer. They're the pro. I mean, I can tell them this is in the book, but I could also end up with a cover that has a guitar, a chicken, like that doesn't give any artistic sense of what the book's about. It's just me telling you all these details. And I don't want to do that to narrators too much either. So at times I'll say, here's the basics, but, go and have fun with it. And what I find is that the vast majority of narrators that I've worked with, in fact, all of them, have a level of professionalism where they've been able to elevate my writing. And I feel like I want to give them enough information that makes it so that it's more efficient to do my books, but that gives them that creative freedom.
Daisy asks, what book is this jerk from?
My Shopping for a Billionaire series. So that's James McCormick is the kind of the patriarch of this billionaire family. And he has his soft spots too.
A billionaire family.
Yes, billionaire family.
I'm gonna go on vacation with them.
Well, I mean, you must really get into their heads, Andi, because you're doing their voices. You're telling their story in a different way than a reader, like when you have the book in front of you. So is this normal for you to like get this sort of like instructions on basic regionalisms and character descriptions and things like that, or is that unusual?
It's more usual than when I started. But it really varies. Narrators are all freelance. We work for the publishers, we work for independent production companies, we work directly for authors. We choose public domain work and produce that ourselves and put that out there. There's like 50 versions of Alice in Wonderland, etc. And some publishers will give you kind of the story Bible and a style sheet that's got every word that you could possibly want to look up, just like right there on the sheet. So you can go, I know how to say that. Oh, I don't know how to say that. And of course, there's always the unknowns that you have to look out for. But yeah, I love it when I'm provided with research. Some high volume production companies who don't have staff for that will say, you do the research, but track your time and we'll pay you for it. Which is an option. I love research. I love, like I had a Penelope Ward book last week and the main characters went to a park in Rhode Island. And I had a feeling it was a real park. So I looked it up and it is a real park. And I went to the website and imagine playing Frisbee with your dog right on Narragansett Bay. Like there's the bay and there's this beautiful green lawn. And so as I narrated the scene, I knew where they were. And I don't know if it sounds different, but I have a richer experience. So I like to think that it influences my mood. I don't know.
Interesting. Somebody in the chat, let me see who said, Anne says, Andi, you have nailed Crazy Darla.
Thank you.
And Anne also asked in the Q&A, do you have a favorite Julia character?
I mean, Darla, hello.
I thought so. Okay.
Yeah.
Got that out of the way.
I have to say, like, I did come into Julia's world through her romantic suspense. And I guess I tend to get more sort of like serious romance. And when she honored me with comedy, I was just like, because sometimes I'm funny and I think I can be funny with funny material, but I don't always get it. I don't always get funny material assigned to me. And so it's really great when that comes my way.
Well, you nailed it. I mean, you really, really did. And one of the things that a lot of people who read and now listen to the Random series, they go in thinking it's just a comedy. And it's not. There's tremendous pathos in there as well. And at times, literally in the same page. and that's something that a very, very skilled narrator, I needed someone as skilled as you, and you really, really hit it. But I do remember cringing at times, sending you manuscripts thinking she just has no idea what's coming. There's the waxing scene in book 6.
Oh my.
There are certain scenes where I thought they're gonna all quit. All my narrators are going to quit.
It is fiction, is it not?
It is. Oh yes.
I mean, like, whenever people get upset about this kind of stuff, I go, but it's fiction. So it's okay. It's not actually real.
Well, I mean, it could be real. I mean, we're not saying like Julia did this stuff. We're just saying like, those things could be real. So
Of course.
So which
Of
brings me
course.
to my Smexy question, which I had mentioned to you earlier too, is that because you said that you came to romance a little bit late, and Julia, as we all know, writes very like, I'm just going to call it Smexy, like very hot, sexy, interesting, creative scenes, I'll say. And so like I wondered in terms of production, how is that for you to be narrating people having sex in all kinds of creative and ways and places?
Well, I actually teach narrators about narrating romance.
Oh.
And I find it fascinating because coming from an acting background, a kiss is an action. Patting someone on the shoulder is an action. Opening the door is an action. Sitting down at your desk is an action. Smacking somebody on the butt is an action. It's more what is going on with these two people at this point in their relationship. And it's kind of like in a musical, a good, well-written musical, because I see Hamilton is there on your wall. A well-written
original cast signed. I'm just going to totally brag now.
Amazing. In a well-written musical, the song should move the story along so that the relationship has changed from before the song and after the song, right? Some kind of emotional territory has been uncovered or explored. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with an intimate scene. If it's their first kiss, or if they tried to have a quickie in the closet at work, or if it's their wedding night, or I don't know, like, who are these people? What do they want? What is happening? What are they learning? Is this story about regaining trust, and then through that trust, intimacy? Okay, then that's what we're doing. Is this I had a hilarious scene one time where this couple were like super hot for each other, and he lifted her up on the kitchen counter, and she had to scooch back, and she knocked the dinner that she had put so much time into like off the other side of the counter, and they didn't even care because they were just like, we'll get it later, so it's not about me and my feelings about what the people are doing or what it's I coach narrators to think of it as a sacred space, that it's holy. It's not that it's hot. I mean, it might be hot, right? But it's sacred. In life, when you actually have the privilege of being with somebody that you can be intimate with, that doesn't just come along every day. And when that comes along, it's sacred. It's really incredible. And so I try to almost imagine, and this is really weird. So like my mental image is that I am a silent observer in the space with them. And I'm telling the story, but in such a way that I'm not going to pop the bubble,
Which is the curious part to me, because so what you just said is amazing to me, because I read romance, and I have for many years, and that the sex scenes are part of the story and move it along. But for people who poo-poo romance, and Julia, we all know who they are, and you have to go into a production studio, let's say, and read the sexy scenes. How do you get through that with people that are listening into this sacred space?
It really depends on who that is. I've worked with engineers who are super respectful and basically just push the buttons and do their job, and they don't comment. I have not personally experienced, but I know narrators who have had the misfortune to be recorded by somebody who feels entitled to comment after the recording of that scene is over, which is out of bounds. In the same way that, you know, your gynecologist commenting on, you know, feelings of attraction would be completely out of bounds. Like, that this is a professional, we are here to do this job, and it's going to be, if it's hot, it's going to be hot, right? But that doesn't mean that you, the engineer, get to if I have caused you to go into your memory and think about things and stuff, I don't really want, that's your business. I really don't.
That would be like an editor
Yeah.
giving highly personalized feedback along, like inappropriate feedback after reading something that an author had written, like saying, oh, well, that scene made me, you know, whatever, like that.
Yeah. And I have encountered people who, you know, poo-poo romance, as you say. And I just say, hey, have you ever gone out to dinner with another couple and asked them how they met? Because if you did, you just asked them to tell you a romance, because there's a happily ever after, because they're sitting across the table. But you wanted to hear how they got together because it interested you. So,
yeah.
Again, speaking to the choir, I totally get that.
Well, you know, in writing romance, one of the standard things that gets said is that every sex scene moves the plot along, or moves the relationship along. If you can pull the sex scene out of a book and it flows perfectly, then you don't need it. It doesn't, it's not material to the storyline. So something has to happen in the scene that changes the characters or deepens their relationship or affects plot. And so when people trivialize those scenes, it's really diminishing what makes a romance a romance.
Well, I just have to comment on that, because I think that is somebody's misunderstanding of what because people have sex for all kinds of reasons, and not every sexual encounter has to be because you had a really deep connection in that moment or whatever it is. So so like that is part of it. You know, Anne asks too, you know, how do you control like being just laughing through Julia's books, not just through like her funny parts, but like, you know, giggling through some of the sexy scenes?
You know, if I get the giggles, sometimes I give myself the giggles because of a blooper. I had a blooper the other day where I said, you know, you always see that, here's what you should say, and you're going, what did I say? And then you listen to what you actually said, and you're like, okay. I was supposed to say something like, I nibbled his earlobe and kissed down his neck, and down further to the place where I was supposed to say, to the place where my name was tattooed over his heart, right? That's beautiful. But what I said was, I nibbled his earlobe and kissed down his neck and continued down to the place where his name was tattooed over his heart.
Oh, a little self-centered bastard.
So, a whole other situation there, and that, you know, like narcissist much, or but I started picturing a bowling shirt, you know, with the name, or like maybe he couldn't remember his name on the first day of school, and my imagination starts, you know, yucking it up, and then like I have to be like, shh, get, you know, go away, I'm trying to, you know, fix this. So I'll get the giggles, but I usually just pinch my hand really hard with my other fingernails.
Wow, you really do what you need to do for your profession.
I think every actor, because if it happens on, like, if I'm in the studio, I can take a half an hour laughing if I want to. If people are in a play, or they're on a movie set or a TV film set, and they get the giggles, and time is money, they have to figure out really fast how to knock that stuff off. So we all have our little I think pinching, I don't hurt myself, but I think pinching calls my brain's attention to something besides the loop of mirth that I was caught in. So
Well, I just can imagine, Julia, you two like writing and coming up with these like hilarious scenarios. How do you keep from like having to stop just to like have a good laugh?
I don't worry about it. I just stop and have a good laugh, and I'm alone, in front of my keyboard. It just happened yesterday. I wrote a really, really awesome turning point in a book, like the kind that ends a chapter with like dun 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 in this really funny way, like really funny way, the kind that, and my husband is my alpha reader, and he read it and he was like, oh, you're like, write the next chapter, but like really funny stuff where I start piling it on and the reader is in on the joke, but the characters don't know what's coming. And that kind of a chapter that's so much, it's so joyful to write that, but it's also like I start cackling, like the readers are gonna, and so I get to just cackle. Nobody cares. I'm not recording. I can, that's one thing. I'm listening to this fascinated, because the acting side of it, if you have your own studio, it's a little different, but if you're doing a full cast production, time is money, or people are there. Yeah. You've got a lot going on, where, I'm the lonely writer, and I say that in a good way. Because I don't mind being alone, just doing my thing, but I don't have to censor, which is great.
It is awesome. I can just see you there too, cackling. So it's pretty cool. And I have to tell everybody who's here that it took me, I've known Julia, for like 5-6 years at least?
5 or 6 years, yeah.
And it was about 6 months ago when I realized that your husband's name is Clark Kent.
Yes.
So you're welcome, for anybody who didn't get that. So
does he ever get pulled over and the cops think he's like being sought? Yeah, sure you are.
I know. Let's see you change. Pull your shirt open. I can see Clark doing that too.
No, but there have been a couple readers. He's come to events, and there have been a couple readers who almost seemed like they wanted to say that to him. So we'll just leave it at that.
Well, if he can come to RomCon in May, I will ask him.
I'll see if he can.
Okay. So Sarah asked, and I have this question too, Andi, about reading both male and female parts. Now, one of the things that can totally throw me out of an audiobook is when, especially a male narrator is doing a female voice, and it's very high pitched, because they don't know how to do a female voice. So how did you get to be so good at doing, male, female, making sure that we understand who's speaking within the scene?
Yeah, the interesting thing, and I also coach narrators who are trying to get better at that. Because I used to teach speech. I used to teach a voice method pioneered by a woman named Kristen Linklater, who passed away a few years ago. But it's just understanding this whole mechanism and where the resonance happens, and how to finely tune variations in placement and your mouth and just everything. So, I don't really talk about men and women talking. I think more about masculinity and femininity along a spectrum. Because, I've had women who were my boss who have a lot of the qualities that I would use with a male character. I just slightly adjust certain timbre, maybe. And then I've had male characters who are super expressive. And so that's a feminine side of that male character, or like a femininity. It's a spectrum, like, right, as we all know, right? And even one character might fall in different places along that same spectrum, depending on the context and depending on the scene that they're in. Like my husband used to say, when I was around my grandparents, my voice went up an octave, So who are they talking to? What do they want? All those actor questions. But there is there's a resonance that happens here that I'll kind of lean into with, especially the male main character, if he's supposed to be that kind of guy. And my singing range has actually, it used to be soprano 2, and I'm now an alto 2, because just muscularly, these muscles have gotten more well developed. And also, as women get older, our voice range, shifts downward a little bit. So I got that working for me.
Okay. I'm going to go back to audience questions in a second, but I want to ask this before I forgot, is you had mentioned, you both mentioned like the full, like a show almost where you have more than one narrator. For me, that's been relatively new. How does that work for you, Julie, when you're writing, and Andi, when you're narrating, when you have more than one narrator? How do you split it up? How do you decide how it's going to work? I'm really curious.
Well, for me, so there's a difference between a book that has multiple characters and multiple points of view, and therefore, like some of my random books have 3 narrators, but they're each reading the point of view of the 3 main characters. When you talk about a full cast, that's more like something full cast, like where you might have 5 or 6 people, and they're each, and Andi can speak more to this than I can, of course, because she's done them, but that's almost like radio play-ish, or that's how I think of it. And I've had, one of my books was done that way. It's not available right now. It's a long, very strange rights story. And it was beautiful to hear it because it involved sound effects and the whole bit. It was like literally listening to an old time radio play, but modernized. But I don't, so because I don't write for that, like I don't expect that kind of production to happen as a result of my books. I don't write for that. If I knew going into it that I was going to have a full cast audiobook done, I would absolutely write differently. But it's something I'd have to go research. I wouldn't just start doing it. I'd need to make sure I knew what to do.
Huh. Before you answer, Andi, I'm surprised, Julia, because I thought you had figured out who was going to be your narrator before you started writing, because the book doesn't the audiobook come out the same time as the physical book?
So sometimes I've been trying very hard to have simultaneous audio is what it's called. And so for instance, in my Love You series, which is set in Love You, Maine, the town where every day is Valentine's Day. I'm not minimizing that. It's just like this cute little thing. Aaron Mallon and Teddy Hamilton are currently the narrators. But in those cases, those aren't full cast. Those are Aaron is the female point of view and Teddy is the male point of view. And then they each do the characters themselves. But I know Lauren Blakely has done full cast audio where, and I don't know if she wrote it differently when she went into it. But.
Okay. And so Andi, when you are tasked with a multi-narrator book, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, Lauren wrote several large multicast productions pre-lockdown. And so, one we did in New York, one we did in LA, and how amazing, for all of us we have our theater background. We love the the cast togetherness and everything. That's fun because you only need to prepare one character and you're just speaking that character's lines, and you get the energy from the other people that you're in a scene with. The recording environment is set up in such a way that if I'm over here speaking in this microphone, my castmates are far enough away from me that my voice is not going to go in their microphone and cause weird noise bleed stuff. So it's a little bit more technically tricky. And schedule wise, it's tricky too, because, and I got to be the queen of this. You could ask Lauren, the Excel spreadsheet that efficiently groups everyone into blocks of time that they need to be in the studio and not waste their time. So we're going to do these 5 scenes out of order because these 5 people are in these scenes. And then, like for one of the ones that we did in New York, we did the full cast stuff the one day, and then Sebastian York and I had so many chapters together that we gave ourselves the whole day the next day, just the 2 of us in the studio, which is great because I get along with him just fantastically. We're big friends. And then that night I threw a full cast dinner. So we went down to this amazing Italian place in Greenwich Village and just sat around this family style table and ate this amazing Italian food. And yeah.
That's wonderful that you have this community that gives you that like energy. I'm curious too, because some books are narrated chapter by chapter. So they'll have 2 or 3 narrators, but each narrator reads a chapter. And that means that that person has to read every voice in that chapter. And it's so confusing to me because in one chapter, it's this female voice doing all the voices, and the next one, it might be a male voice doing all of the voices, including the ones at the, do you have a preference? Do either of you have a preference?
I think it depends on the work. I guess that's kind of a, it depends answer, but, well, so sometimes I like audiobooks that are in what's called duet, where if it's male female, then the guy speaks all of the male lines, even if they're embedded in the woman's point of view, and the woman vice versa. I just like stories. So sometimes it's more just I want to hear the story, and I don't really care about how the structure of the actual audiobook comes out. It's more, I like this narrator, I like this story, I'm going to listen to this. So I guess I'm kind of, I don't have a strong opinion, so I might not be the right person to ask.
Yeah, I just think it's whatever the story needs. And I say that as a listener too. Like there was a book several years back called The Mare by Mary Gateskill. I love the audiobook of that. That's 4 narrators, and it has to do with a girl who is sent to live with a couple through the Fresh Air Fund one summer, and how that changes all of their lives in ways that they didn't expect. Yeah. And just being in the little girl's chapters with her, and then switching to the Fresh Air Fund mom's perspective, and the dad, and the mom back in the Bronx, and how she feels threatened, and all this stuff. It's really fantastic. As a narrator, I would say solo narration is easier in some ways because I don't have to worry that my co-narrator said something differently than the way that I say it. Where we're going to get corrections of, because I did actually just get, I'm part of a full cast production, and we were given pronunciation research, but one of the pronunciations was a Google link that actually could take you to a number of different videos. And I don't know if it's that Google rotates which one pops up, but I heard one that had the emphasis on the first syllable. And apparently everybody else heard one that had the emphasis actually where you were expecting it to be. And so I got this very sheepish email saying, "We're so sorry, but we literally calculated who would have the least amount of corrections, and it's you. So we need you to do these 38 instances of this name because everybody else said it the other way, and you actually said it the way that you were instructed to." But you need to fix it. So, you just find yourself, and you got to be a team player and just say, okay, it's part of the process. So I'll hop in there and say that name 38 times and send it off.
Okay. I love that, team player. Because it seems like it can be, as in writing, it can be a very lonely job too, if you're just in your studio narrating, or if you're in your office writing. So it's nice that you have those opportunities to really connect with other people in the profession. Maria asks, Andi, when you narrate so many books, how do you keep your characters from sounding the same?
I don't know that I keep them from sounding the same. I think what makes them sound different is a different writer and a different situation, and that you, the listener, fill in things around the words and the sound of my voice that change your experience of my voice. Because at this point, I've done over 600 books.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of have a cast of characters. It's like a repertory company that lives in my head. And I love when I get to use this one, but I never do.
I love that. This is something you would do a voice, even if it's one that we don't know.
No, because these kind of people are so much fun. And yeah.
So who is that? Like what, like
She's
when,
the ditz where you tell her something and she goes, oh, that makes so much sense. I think, yeah, I think I understand that. I think, yeah.
All been there. So, Julia, Sarah asks, can you share some of your writing routine? Because how are you able to get so many books out?
well, lately I have not been getting so many books out because I tore my rotator cuff and my brain doesn't like to dictate. But thank you, Sarah. I don't have a writing routine. I literally don't, other than gnashing my teeth and you know, shaking my fist at the sky, the one that works. But for the most part, I'm what's called a pantser. That means I write by the seat of my pants. And so I come up with an idea, and my more recent series, the Love You series, is a little different because I plotted that out in more detail. Although this last book ended up being pantsed more. But I come up with an idea. I typically write the description of the book first. I come up with a title, and then I write the description, and then I decide, do I want to write this book based on the description? Because based on the description, would I want to read this book? So, and my writing process has evolved. It, you know, the random series I didn't choose to write. It chose me. And Darla's voice, I was driving on the turnpike one day, and out of the blue, the first line, the last ever bleeping thing I expected to see while driving down the turnpike was a naked man wearing a dog collar and carrying a guitar, something, you know, close. And then I went home and wrote 10,000 words. And that doesn't happen very often lately. There's, so mostly my process now, it's a little different. Because of the pandemic, we had massive childcare issues that really affected my career. And I say that openly because I think we are all parents. We are partner, or parents, daughters, sons, siblings, you know, every single one of us is connected to another human being on some level and has had roadblocks and issues. But right now, my writing process, for the most part, is making sure that I'm more true to myself. That's and that doesn't mean that my other writing wasn't, but I'm really finding that I want to write what I want to write more and more. And sometimes I write because I feel like, oh, readers want the next book in that series. And that's a good thing, of course, because you guys, you know, want more of Darla, or you want more of Shannon and Declan. But I have other ideas too. And those are, you know, often shouting more and more. I have a couple of books that are more women's fiction, and I'm finding myself drawn to those. But I do write with more of an eye toward audiobooks now, and not that I do anything specific that's dramatically different from the past, but it is more when I'd say the first 2 or 3 years that I wrote and published, I didn't assume that they were going into audio. And now I assume that if I write a book, it's going into audio. And because that format is so important for so many people, it's an accessibility issue, which is becoming more and more important to me. I would even argue I'm reaching a point of activism when it comes to disability issues. And so I think that in that sense, my writing routines have changed, because I'm also thinking, do I have time to write this in advance so that I can get it into audio so that it's accessible? But yeah, I don't know if that's much of an answer.
Well, Coco wanted a follow-up question about, do you use an outline? I know you're a pantser mostly, or do you write in a straight line, meaning you write in bits and pieces and put it together, or do you just write?
I write in bits and pieces. I write in weird one-off lines. I have, it's describing my writing process requires me to take a meta approach. Like it requires me to step back out of myself and look at myself to be able to describe it to someone else. And I realized more recently, I write out of order. I am not, sorry, I keep hitting my microphone. I'm not a linear writer. And I will often at the end of a document have scenes and snippets, like lines, funny lines, a line of dialogue that Darla or Shannon or Rachel says. And then as I write, I go and I it's like a swipe file. I go and find where they go. And the problem is, because I write out of order, by the time I'm at the end, I have to knit it all together and make sure it makes sense. And then my editor hates me because, the baby that's, 11 months old in chapter 3 is, 8 months old in chapter 14, and like these kinds of things. Or like, wait a minute, he has super short hair and super long hair, and the long hair comes after the short hair, and it's only been 3 days, and you need to, but I write that way because in the moment, the thing that calls to me has to be documented, has to be written, it has to come out when it comes out, and it often changes the story. So my current work in progress, I've shifted. So like the original outline is the fiction.
Interesting. I'm going to ask you about that in a second. Andi, I want to know if you've ever gotten a book which you thought, this is terrible. This is a terrible book, and you obviously had to narrate it. Can you do anything about the writing?
I don't have to narrate a book that I don't want to narrate.
Really? Even if you've already said that you'll do it?
I don't say I'll do it unless I either trust and know the author or have a copy of the manuscript from a new to me author. Because I've learned the hard way that not to do that. I mean, I've learned the hard way to do that, not to say yes to something sight unseen with no sense of who the author is. And years ago, a friend who I trust, so there was the trust factor, was my friend, said, listen, I narrate a lot of books by this one author, but their very first book, which, as you guys know, is often an author's most personal book, is not in audio, and the author feels strongly it should be a female narrator. And, would you do that? And because I trusted my friend, who's still my friend, I said yes. And I got to a scene that it was like I took a breath, I read the words, and it got stuck right here. And I took my headphones off and I sat with it for a little bit, and I thought, nope, I can't, that's not going to come out of my mouth. And so I wrote to the author and I said, I am so sorry, but I am not going to be able to finish this book. You're going to have to find a different narrator.
Wow.
And I never wanted to have to do that again, because that's really disruptive and kind of unprofessional on my part. I didn't want that to be a pattern. So I thought, okay, what were the things that led to that situation getting as far as it did? And one of the things was I didn't ask for a manuscript to review before I said yes.
Wow, that's amazing. It's so interesting. I have to say that I only listen to audiobooks that I've already read the book, because I love to reread. I don't always have time. And I don't know if other people do this. This is a total quirk of mine. But for me, I already know the story. So the audiobook is just a performance. It's and I love that, because then I can just really enjoy the voice and the different perspective on it that I had from my own, hearing it in my own head. So I think audiobooks they just save my sanity. And I am so glad that you do what you do. And Julia, that you write the books that you write that make me happy. We're not done yet. I just had to throw that in there. So Coco asks, for both of you, where are your next appearances?
I believe mine is RomCon, which is at the Ashland Library. It's May 20th, am I getting that right? And that's a very rare appearance for me because I'm immunocompromised. And so it will hopefully be outdoors. Let's hope the weather's good. And I'm very excited because Mina does phenomenal in-person events as well as virtual. And it's I live 15 minutes away from the library. I won't tell anyone which direction. It's a pretty wide circle here in Metro West Boston, but that's my next in-person or virtual appearance.
Okay, so in May. How about you, Andi?
Well, this Saturday, I'm teaching a masterclass for narrators in Nashville, Tennessee. And then as far as like signings go, I'm excited to say that at the end of April, I will be at Rare Melbourne in Australia.
Ooh.
Oh, how wonderful.
I have been hearing about that. So is that, do you feel like narrators have become more visible now? Because I know we have a narrator coming to RomCon in May. So like, are you more involved in like cons and conferences and things like that?
Yeah, I think we have made it that way. A critical mass of us started to put author events on our radar, to go to them, because there are people who are audio only. You know, they don't read print, they don't read, they are audio only, readers. And when we would participate in like the giant oral fixation Facebook group, people would get excited. And then we would see on that group, there are these events coming up. And so naturally you're like, well, I want to go to that event. And it's good for us to meet authors that we work with, and good to see people as three-dimensional, human beings. And every time I meet an author that I narrate for, it improves my comprehension of what they are about. When the next time I get their script, I get like talking to Julia this afternoon, getting ready for this, and being with you. I have a sense of your energy. It doesn't mean that your books are exactly the same, but I just have a sense of there's like a groundedness underneath the zany that I know is in there, right? Yeah, so it's just interesting to meet authors in person and go, huh, okay, all right, noted.
Okay, so last question. What are you, Julia, writing right now? What can we look forward to from you?
So I'm in edits right now for a book that I've had to postpone a few times, but it is coming. It is one. I'm horrible. Former professor hands. So it's coming February 28th. It's called Love You Now. And it's the 4th book in my Love You Maine series. And they're kind of like Julia Kent spin on Hallmark movies. So set in a goofy touristy town in the western mountains of Maine. But after that, I've got a couple different things, but one of the things I'm working on is a book about a female tuba teacher and a guy who's going blind, which my husband has the same condition that the hero has. And that sounds so depressing, but it's a rom-com. I'm also working on a one night stand book, which I've never written a one night stand book. So that one's
Love that.
fun. Yeah.
It's a good
Yeah.
trope to have.
Those are
It's
fun.
It's a
Those
fun one.
are-
And I have the hero has an English accent and I'm already like, ooh, I better reach out to a narrator studio to see if I can book someone, but it's not done yet. So I have to be careful, but that's what I'm working on right now and having a lot of fun getting back in the groove.
Good. And Andi, what are you narrating now? What can we look forward to from you?
Well, romance-wise, I have Laurel and Page, Jill Shalvis, Vi Keelan, Penelope Ward, and A.L. Jackson on my schedule for the next, little bit. And this
I'm in
week-
awe.
I know. And this week I'm working on some short story collections, one horror short story. So I love mixing it up. And next week I'm going to be doing a thriller called Even If It Kills Her by Kate White.
You got a Kate White?
I got a Kate White.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Oh my gosh, I wish we could talk for another hour so that I can ask you about all about this not romance ones, if there's any differences, if if the authors are less fun than the romance ones. Blah, blah. I have so many questions. I'm going to have to do a take 2 of this at some point, but we are out of time for tonight. So thank you, Andi, Julia. This has been such a blast for me. And I appreciate everybody being here and asking their questions. I hope you learned a lot and had a good time. So thank you. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you very much, Mina.
Yeah, thank you. And to the Friends of the Ashland Library for hosting.
Absolutely. We are always happy to have Julia in the house. And when she brings her friends, it's even better.
Well, thank you, Andi, too, for coming. This has been a blast. And I've learned so much. All kinds of stuff I didn't know. Yeah.
Same here.
Awesome. All right. Well, if you want to go to narrator school, talk to Andi. All right. Good night, everyone.
Night.